Okay, well, wonderful. Well, let's get started with the prayer then, and let's see. Have you offered a prayer for us in the past couple of classes?
Yeah, but that's okay.
Oh, would you mind offering another?
Sure, I'm happy
okay, thank
to.
you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Dear Father in heaven, as we begin this class this day, we ask that our minds can be open to this material that we are going to study, and that we will be able to concentrate on it and be able to let any other distractions leave our mind for now. We are indeed grateful to be studying this section in history, and especially how important it is in having people speak up for their own rights and learning about their ability to use their own agency in relation to governance. We are so grateful for American Heritage School and the privilege it offers us to speak freely of those things that we believe in. We are so grateful for the conference which we have just been able to listen to, and ask that Thou please bless our dear prophet and all of the 12 and their families for the sacrifice they make. Will Thou please bless them with the health and the strength and endurance that they need. We are indeed grateful for the many blessings we have, and we recognize Thy hand in all of these things, and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate your earnest prayer, and that was one thing actually too from conference. I mean, this is the second conference in a row now, at least, that I can remember where President Monson has said, "And please remember me in your prayers." And yeah, I think there's real power in that, and thank you for doing that in your prayer. Well, okay, so here we are, a little bit of review of the schedule. So today we're going to discuss the English Bill of Rights, and we've got a great lesson today on that. And then we have a real treat on Wednesday. We're going to talk about Trenchard and Gordon, and I think that as we read through them and discuss them, that we'll hopefully rediscover why the colonists found them to be so immensely popular and relevant. And then, let's see, those who choose to do the 5-paragraph essay will have that due at their tutorial this week. That's comparing Locke's ideas with the ideas written to the Declaration of Independence. And then Wednesday, we'll discuss Trenchard and Gordon. And then the next time we'll see each other will be Monday. And the homework for Monday will be to complete an assignment. And this assignment is called Distance Glorious Revolution Assessment. And I'll show you that assignment in one second. And just make sure that you pay close attention to the instructions. And that's this one right here I'm talking about. Please pay close attention to the instructions, and also, if you have time, you can also prepare for Monday's lesson by viewing the PowerPoint presentation, Music and Art from the Era of the American Revolution, which we'll discuss, as I said, on Monday. Okay, hi, Wendy.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, that's okay. We're happy to have you. Okay, and so I was...
Can I ask you a question? We're
yes,
finishing up the Glorious Revolution then and moving into the American Revolution?
Yep, yes.
Okay,
yep.
So after Cato's letter, is that the end of the Glorious Revolution, or is that the beginning of the American Revolution?
Okay,
or
so
is that
really...
kind of the bridge between the two?
Yeah, it's a bridge. Basically, the English Bill of Rights will be our sort of crowning achievement or fulfillment of the Glorious Revolution. We'll discuss that today. And then Trenchard and Gordon, they were, we'll talk more about them specifically, but Trenchard was part of the pamphlet wars going on during the Glorious Revolution. He was a strong Commonwealthman for Parliament and consensus of the governed and all of that. And then he ended up meeting Gordon a little bit later, and then they became a team of writers. They wrote the Independent Whig and then Cato's letters, but they were writing in the early 18th century. And so it's interesting because their ideas take the ideas of the Glorious Revolution and they apply them even more specifically to the 18th century. And so they really do form this very neat bridge between the ideas of men like Locke and then the ideas of men like Jefferson. And so they're our bridge leading from sort of the one unit to the next.
Okay.
And so for this assignment, that will be due on Monday, as you can see here. Let me show you where to find it. If you go to View in Brain Honey, and you go to your World History Distance section, it's coming up. Okay, then you'll notice that it says, let's see on the side here, I'll show you. So if this folder here is buttoned up, click on Glorious Revolution, and then you'll notice at the bottom, and I'll pull this aside so you can see the whole thing there, it says Distance Glorious Revolution Assessment, and then even a little further here, there we go, due 10/12, so that's a week from today. And then here are the instructions. Please open the attachment and follow the directions. Your written response is due before class on 10/12. Please email it to me at ngentile@ahsmail.com. And then what you do is you can just go here to the attachment and open it up. And then you'll see that here's a unit assessment, and the assignment is to please write a thoughtful response to the following question: what is the significance of the Glorious Revolution? And then it explains here the purpose, the instructions, advice, and all of that. Anyway, so that's something that if you'd like to do it, I think it'll help me to understand what you've taken away from our primary source readings, PowerPoint presentations, class discussions, and then weekly tutorials, as well as it, I think, will help you to understand what you've taken away from those things too. So if you'd like to do that, you may. For Walter, though, that will be something that I'm definitely looking for. But I don't think he's with us, so unfortunately, I guess we'll just move on then. Okay. Any questions though from either of you?
Nope.
Okay, and so this is there. If you do have any questions, you can shoot me an email or just ask me at next class, or shoot me an email after next class. But it's pretty straightforward. I tried to be inclusive with the directions. Okay, so there we go. I'll shut that down for now, and then I will go to our English Bill of Rights PowerPoint, which is what will be our lesson for today, and that's there in the folders for you if you ever want to go back and review it. Okay, here we go. From the beginning. Okay, so English Bill of Rights, 1789. Did both of you get a chance to read at least pages 63 and 64?
Yeah, and it's 1689, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, 1689. I'm sorry, that is a grievous typo. I'm very sorry.
But wasn't it exactly 100 years later that America ratified our Bill of Rights?
Isn't that a neat connection?
Yeah.
That's a very neat connection. And one thing, I apologize for that typo. I read it over a couple times. I didn't catch it. Well, so
our Bill of Rights was. I'm sorry. Our Bill of Rights was written 2 years after the Constitution. Then.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right, because 1787 it was written, and then there was the ratification process that occurred that was in many cases contingent on the Bill of Rights being written into it, and so it took a couple years for that. And so here's a picture of the English Bill of Rights, and I'm not sure if any of you can make that out, but it's pretty faded to me. Well, let's first talk about a Bill of Rights. So let's reason, why is a Bill of Rights so important?
Oh, it establishes some ground rules.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good reminder. I vaguely remember hearing that in the tug of war behind whether or not they were going to do a Bill of Rights, some people argued against it, saying, well, these are just natural, inalienable rights. We shouldn't even have to write them down. But I don't know. I'm on the side of writing things down is better. Getting things on paper is better than assuming that they're inalienable.
Mm-hmm.
You can also make that same argument with the Proclamation on the Family, which was such a duh when it was written, and it's not such a duh anymore.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great great relation there. Excuse me. I think it is so interesting because as my wife and I we're moving this week. We're moving from an apartment to a house for the first time, and we're very excited about that. But it's interesting as we think about all the different things we have to do in the evenings and during the day, and to try to make it all happen. My wife and I we were talking, and we realized that even though we both understood what we needed to do and had sort of an idea of each day what should happen, that we really needed to write it down in order to try to ensure that we could really go through and check things off and make sure they got done. And so I thought that it was interesting how when Wendy was talking about, yeah, you need to make sure you write it down, I've seen that in my life. And that, it is interesting because, there were so many people saying, yeah, if these are just, they're natural rights, they're just protected, we don't have to write them down. This is what the Federalists were saying. They're implicit, and so because they're implied, don't worry, they'll be protected. But then we'll see all the arguments for why, no, we really do need to write them down. And I love what Heidi said about the proclamation again, because sure, maybe things seem implied and just, oh, of course, duh, right, at the time, but when situations change, they're not so duh anymore. So, okay, well, let's go. Here's a great quote, wonderful talk from Elder Oaks. It was given, printed in February 1992 Ensign. He said, quote, "It was a miracle that the Constitution could be drafted and ratified. But what is there in the text of the Constitution that is divinely inspired?" Well, it's interesting because he answers his question by explaining what he called 5 great fundamentals that are protected and written into the Constitution. He talked about separation of powers between branches of government. He talked about division of powers between state and national, or what we call federal, governments. And then also he talked about popular sovereignty and the rule of law, and also the Bill of Rights. And I thought it was very, very interesting as I went and I reread what he said about the Bill of Rights. It was interesting because I have a quote here. It goes over a couple pages. Wendy, would you read this page for us here? This is, once again, a quote from Elder Oaks.
A written Bill of Rights. This second great fundamental came by amendment, but I think Americans all look upon the Bill of Rights as part of the inspired work of the Founding Fathers. The idea of a Bill of Rights was not new. Once again, the inspiration was in the brilliant practical implementation of pre-existing principles. Almost 600 years earlier, King John had subscribed the Magna Carta, which contained a written guarantee of some rights for certain of his subjects. The English Parliament had guaranteed individual rights against royal power in the English Bill of Rights of 1689. Even more recently, some of the charters used in the establishment of the American colonies had written guarantees of liberties and privileges with which the delegates were familiar.
Okay, so here, I love looking at this quote because it ties back to English history. And here we are, for the past few weeks we've been studying English history, the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, which we'll analyze today in great depth. And so this heritage of liberty within the English Empire coming over to America and blessing our lives, seeing that hand of God in the people who settled America, who they were and what they brought with them, I think is so important. Well, the quote continues, and this is where I really love his language here. Heidi, would you read this for us?
I have always felt that the United States Constitution's closest approach to scriptural stature is in the phrasing of our Bill of Rights. Without the free exercise of religion, America could not have served as the host nation for the restoration of the gospel, which began just 3 decades after the Bill of Rights was ratified. I also see scriptural stature in the concept and wording of the freedoms of speech and press, the right to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures, the requirements that there must be probable cause for an arrest, and that accused persons must have a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, and the guarantee that a person will not be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. President Ezra Taft Benson has said, "Reason, necessity, tradition, and religious conviction all lead me to accept the divine origin of these rights."
Okay, wow. What strikes you from this part of the quote?
Okay, let's see. Well, the first part, without the free exercise of religion, America could not have served as the host nation for the restoration of the gospel. So I guess the Bill of Rights clarifies the free exercise of religion, which was so important to the gospel being restored here.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that, Heidi. Hi, Walter. Are you with us?
Yes, I am here.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you. We're talking about the English Bill of Rights, and we're talking about the importance of the Bill of Rights, and we're talking about Elder Oaks talking about why a Bill of Rights is important, and he's specifically talking about the U.S. Bill of Rights. So what about you, Wendy? I know that you were able to read that quote with us. What stood out to you? And Walter, just so you know, this is the quote that's right in front of us on the screen now.
Probably just the memory maybe 10 years ago when it hit me that, oh my gosh, Joseph Smith was born, I think, I figured it out, it was 14 years after the Bill of Rights was ratified and freedom of religion was put into writing for the first time, and it just it just seems so obvious how all these things were just falling in place. God was just needed certain things to fall in place before he could restore the gospel. It was just one of those big aha moments.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that. I just think it's so amazing, and I really appreciate it in Heidi's prayer when we started class. She just thanked Heavenly Father for giving us the opportunity to talk about these things that are so near and dear to our hearts here at American Heritage School. And so, I'm so grateful that we can talk about the fact that God's hand was in the founding of this great nation, and talk about it in connection to the restoration of the gospel. And so, I am glad that we can talk about these things. What about for you, Walter? If you've had a chance to look over this quote now, what stands out to you?
I have not had chance to get the whole thing quite yet. So, yeah, I'm just looking over it kind of right now.
Okay. Well, we'll give you a second then, and then just let us know what sticks out to you, okay?
Okay.
I have one other comment. I
Sure,
think it's
please.
interesting how at the very end it talks about, the quote by President Benson, reason, necessity, tradition, and religious conviction all lead me to accept the divine origin of these rights. And so it makes me think, well, how do we tell if a law or a right is good and should be included? And I'm thinking that maybe it has to have some connection to divine origin, or maybe it's overstepping its boundaries.
Yeah, and I think that's that's an interesting thought. I do love how President Benson said that in terms of his view on this, that reason and necessity and tradition and religious conviction, all four of those things led him to accept the divine origin. And so obviously he had studied that out in his mind, and it had become something that he had been able to conclude. And as he talks about through that religious conviction, we might say also through inspiration, that would allow him to accept the divine origin. I also think, too, it's interesting that as Elder Oaks talks about these things, he says that, I've always felt, this right at the beginning, that the United States Constitution's closest approach to scriptural stature is in the phrasing of our Bill of Rights. And so once again, going hand in hand with that, wow, there are principles of our government that either approach scriptural stature or have a divine origin. And I think that's a wonderful blessing for us. What about Walter? Do you have anything to add?
Well, I've read it through, and I think the part about unreasonable search and seizures, that is kind of something that it says the right to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures. And I think that's just something that's really nice, because you don't have to worry about soldiers or police people coming around your house and checking things and making sure, if someone in your neighborhood is broken some law or something, and then they can't just search all the houses in the area. They have to ask you or get a permission. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for that. Well, we'll finish up his quote here and then move ahead to the English Bill of Rights. Let's see. Let's take a moment to advance. There we go.
Is what Dallin Oaks saying here is that he almost feels like the Bill of Rights is more close to Scripture than even the Declaration and the Constitution?
Well, I think if we look at what he says, he does say, I have always felt that the United States Constitution's closest approach to scriptural stature is in the phrasing of our Bill of Rights. I guess beyond reading that, I wouldn't want to risk misquoting him or misinterpreting him. But at least, does anyone want to hazard a guess there?
Oh, okay. well, I guess I think I'm realizing what he's saying is that it sounds closest to Scripture, even though we kind of think of the Constitution as Scripture, because we know it was given by God. But maybe he feels like the wording, is that what he means by stature? I wasn't sure when I read that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, here he's considering the Bill of Rights as part of the Constitution, because he's saying that the Constitution's closest approach is in, the Bill of Rights. And so I think that when he's referring to the Constitution, he's referring to the Constitution with its amendments of the Bill of Rights. Does that make sense?
Yes, but I guess and I don't mean to get off on some tangent, but I guess part of my questioning here is because I had heard a quote by President Obama about he feels like that the Constitution is a flawed document.
Okay.
And that it was written from a colonial point of view and that it really needs to be altered and such and such. Mm-hmm. And I had my husband listen to it, and I said, does that not concern you? And he said, no, it is flawed. They've had to change it many times. And maybe that's more about amendments than it is the Bill of Rights. I guess that's where my confusion is. That's really more about the amendments, right? Than Bill of Rights?
Well, so the Bill of Rights, it was proposed as 12 amendments, and 10 of them were ratified into the Constitution, which are the amendments that we know as the Bill of Rights. Does that?
Okay, that's right. The first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
So, right. Yeah, I mean, that's where can you understand where I'm confused, where, my husband's saying, well, it wasn't perfect. They've had to amend it however many times. So he thinks that Obama's statement is justified, where to me Obama's statement is very concerning. Mm-hmm. But here President Oaks is saying that it's part of the Constitution, which we consider Scripture. So I'm just trying to clarify that in my mind, and I'm sorry.
Well, there are at least a couple quotes I know of where prophets have said that they revere the Constitution as Scripture. Mm-hmm. And I would definitely take any amendment after the Bill of Rights. Some of them are good and some of them aren't good. So I would take those out for sure. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Heidi, I would agree that if President Obama said that, that would be very concerning, because what is flawed about it? The only amendments that they've added to it have been, the power to tax or just miscellaneous things. It's just been additions to it. They haven't ever changed. Well, I guess that's not true, because they have changed the way senators get elected. They've changed the way vice presidents get elected. But the great thing about the Constitution is that it provided for that amendment process within its own words. Mm-hmm. So I have a hard time calling it flawed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really appreciate both of your reasoning and relating about this topic. And honestly, we could have an incredible discussion about it for hours and hours, I'm sure. For today, though, if you don't mind, I would like to move ahead with the English Bill of Rights, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Like I said, I really appreciate both of your comments about that subject. Okay, well, and just to finish up the quote here from Elder Oaks, he said, the Declaration of Independence has posited these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that governments are instituted to secure these rights. This inspired Constitution was established to provide a practical guarantee of these God-given rights, and the language implementing that godly objective is scriptural to me. So we'll close with that for now, and then let's just try to ask ourselves, because this is such an important question, why could the English Bill of Rights be seen as the crowning achievement of the Glorious Revolution?
Because you get it in writing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and beyond just being in writing, that writing is law, right? I mean, that's the great part of this, that you get it into law, that they're actually protected by somebody who has the power to do something if they're not protected.
Well, and that's what the problem with the Magna Carta is. They had it in writing, but there was no one willing to put it into practice. Where here, for the first time, they had they had it both in writing and leaders who were willing to follow it.
Definitely. Thank you so much for pointing that out, right? Because with Parliament sovereign, now we have maybe 300 people who are trying to protect this law rather than just one man who could choose to follow it when it worked for him or not follow it when it didn't work for him. So okay, and then
didn't it also besides the leaders said they follow it, didn't it also give the people some type of recourse if they didn't follow it, like they could kick them out or?
Well, actually, yeah. We'll reason through that in just a second. And so if you could hold that great thought for one moment. Basically, it's interesting, as we look at this Bill of Rights, it was actually a restatement in statutory form, right, in this legal form, of what was called the Declaration of Right, which Parliament presented to William and Mary in March of 1688 when they invited them to join when they invited them to be joint sovereigns of England. And so this now was the formal restatement, codified in law of this Declaration of Right. And it's so important because, as we look, okay, why was it written? Why, it's only so important because there was a need for it. So why was it written?
Well, I think because they were feeling so violated by James II. They said, well, we don't want this to happen again, so we're going to make sure you sign this and say that you agree to what we want you to agree before we let you come in.
Definitely, right? So James II, he's the catalyst. He's sort of the straw, okay, that broke the camel's back. But if you look at the whole century, right, you go from James I, an absolute ruler with his tendencies of divine right of kings. You go with Charles I, beheaded for what he did. We have Charles II and James II, who sort of keep getting worse. And then, we have this final fulfillment of all of the struggles of the 17th century, this, consent of the governed versus divine right of kings. And finally, they're saying, okay, we've decided the question, and here it is in law for all the world to see. Well, as you looked on page 63, can you reason with what offenses was James II charged? There's a whole list of them. What offenses did they levy against him?
They couldn't practice freedom of religion.
It was a huge one. What else?
The one that shocked me was that Protestants were disarmed. I can't believe they took away guns from half the population or just a segment of the population.
Right. I mean, can you imagine if suddenly somebody said, okay, all Mormons, we disagree with you so much that no more Second Amendment rights. Really, it starts to hit home. You're like, wow, think of the freedoms being taken away from these people. What about you, Walter? What struck you in terms of the charges against King James here II?
It says legal and cruel punishments were inflicted, and that's, can't be very fun for the people that it was inflicted on. So I think that's a big one, I think.
Yeah, no, that one's huge, right? And that one would be one that we can see repeated over and over again and written into so many other future bills of rights. Whether it's the UN Declaration of Rights or others, the sort of no cruel and unusual punishment, as they say here, illegal and cruel punishments. I think one that really struck me was that he had violated the freedom of election of members to serve in Parliament, right? And that, as we see, is so important because really Parliament represented the people, and so by stopping their election, right, you're taking their consent, and so consent is at the bottom of all of this. Okay, let's see. Well, just for the sake of time, let's move on here because as you read this, if you read closely, I thought it was very interesting, especially if you look on page 64. What did Parliament cite as the origin of Englishmen's stated rights? Can you reason that answer?
I had trouble with this one, but I'm wondering if they were just saying that they were ancient rights, undoubted rights. It says at the very bottom as well.
Yeah, definitely. So ancient, undoubted, right? Let's see here. I think yeah, on page 64, if we look here in the second paragraph, they talk about how they talk about their ancestors, and then they talk about the ancient rights and liberties of their ancestors, right? And so remember, once again, these Englishmen were serious when they said that, when Britain became Britain, when the Saxons came over as, Germanic tribes in the 5th century, they brought with them these ideas of freedom and protected rights. And sure, they were in rudimentary stages, but at the same time, right, they laid the seeds of English liberties. And those seeds have tried to grow, and they've been suppressed, and the plants have been chopped down over the years. But yet, they've grown a little taller with things like the Magna Carta, and then when it was ignored, they were chopped down again. And this whole past century of the 1600s, we've been trying to grow those seeds that aren't a new invention, but a restoration. Does that sound familiar? President Packer talks about that in terms of our church. It's a restoration, not a new invention, but the bringing back of something that was had anciently. And that's the way the Englishmen looked at their rights, coming from their forebears in the Germanic woods and moving across to Britain with those tribes.
Did you say originally the Anglo-Saxons? I missed what you said.
Yeah, and so yeah, the Angles and the Saxons, Germanic tribes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, basically the Angles and then the Saxons, when people put them together, they talk about Anglo-Saxon. So just those two tribes together. Okay, and so they believed that they were asserting their ancient rights and liberties, and so then, of course, the next question would be, in our reasoning, okay, so what rights were these ancient rights and liberties? What rights did the bill protect?
Freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
Right to petition?
Right to petition, yep, definitely. What about you, Walter? What do you see?
Well, it says the election of members of Parliament ought to be free, and so I think that means that it's people can elect people to Parliament, and these Parliament's not appointed. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, could we all maybe hit the mute button for a second? Great, thank you so much. And so now, when you speak, you can just unmute yourselves. And I think that if we mute ourselves when we're not speaking, that'll really help with the static. Thank you so much. I hope it sounds better for you. It sounds better to me on this end. Okay, let's see here. What else? What else do you see that maybe is something that you're familiar with?
The right to bear arms, and then a division of power where only the legislative branch has the right to declare war, to convene an army, to suspend law, to tax, protection of trial by jury, and against cruel and unusual punishment and excessive fines.
Definitely, right? There are so many things here that we hear them today, and we're like, oh yeah, well that's we take it for granted, but they didn't. They didn't take it for granted, right? Because these rights had been implied for so long, and now here they are written down into law. So if you think about all of these rights together, and now this is sort of the big picture type of thinking that's so important in our reasoning, right? What revolutionary change in England's government did the Bill of Rights explicitly and legally secure?
Well, the king became more of a figurehead instead of, kind of a little. Well, the king had less power, and the Parliament had more power.
Yeah.
This time.
Definitely, right? Excellent. That's it. That's the answer right there. Basically, all of these rights, if you really look closely at them, they assert the sovereignty of Parliament, and then, of course, by extension, the people, okay, over the king. This is the triumph. Remember, if we look at the 1600s in England as this struggle of the divine right of kings versus consent of the governed, and I know I've probably said it so many times, over the course of our weeks together, but really, that was the battle. Well, the battle's been won, and it's been won by consent of the governed, and this is a huge breakthrough for the world. And so now the monarch is constitutionally limited, right? He has no more absolute power, okay, and we can call England a type of republic, right? And it's what, as we've talked about before, would be known as the beginning of England's parliamentary democracy, right? And so the seeds of our democracy here in America were sown in England, right? In the Glorious Revolution, in the securing of these ancient quote-unquote rights. Okie dokie. So, with that said, then, okay, how do you think the English Bill of Rights influenced the U.S. Bill of Rights? What do you see that may be similar?
All of it seems similar to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think besides freedom of religion, I don't see much missing, except for maybe quartering soldiers in your homes or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it even said something about that, didn't it? Or was it just
maybe.
about... I thought that's, yeah, well, maybe not. Maybe I just assumed that. Or maybe it said that that's what he had been doing, but that's not what they asked for. No, on the first page, it does say
armies against
ordering soldiers contrary to law, yeah. What he was accused of by raising and keeping a standing army within the kingdom in time of peace without consent of Parliament and quartering soldiers contrary to law.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, they didn't say that on the other page as far as what they wanted their rights to be. They didn't talk about the quartering of soldiers. But
yeah, but it is very interesting because this will be a big point here in the colonists in America as we talk about the coming of the American Revolution in the 1760s and then 1770s in America, right? This bulleted point here that the raising or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in a time of peace, unless it be with the consent of Parliament, is against the law, right? That will become a huge point, this fear of standing armies, right? That'll be a huge problem, especially when in 1768 we have 4 regiments of troops sent to Boston because of the protest against the Townsend duties. We'll come to that in a couple weeks. Anyway, but keep that in mind. So there's so many things here, and really, I mean, we could spend probably a very fruitful semester just looking at the similarities between each of the points in the Bill of Rights of England, and then each of the points of the Bill of Rights, in the United States, and how they're so similar. But as we think here, there's a quote that I wanted to share that I really love this quote. And this is from Bernard Bailyn, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. The quote is, let's see, Walter, would you read that for us?
Sure. Did no one know history? Patrick Henry asked. Did no one recall that in Britain the people and the crown had struggled for a century over the uncertainties of implied rights until the matter had finally been unsettled in the acceptance of an explicit Bill of Rights? And that had been precisely the first thing that the American people had thought of when they were faced with the necessities of protecting themselves against Parliament's power. Bailyn, Ideological Origins 350.
Great. Thank you so much. So, Walter, what stood out to you in that quote here? We have the Anti-Federalists talking about how important it will be to have a Bill of Rights before they'll ratify the Constitution, and Patrick Henry talking about the difference between implied rights and then explicit rights. And what stood out to you?
Well, it says in the second sentence that they had struggled for centuries over the uncertainties of implied rights, and then the matter was finally settled with the Bill of Rights, and so, yeah. And that was and it says that's what the American people thought, so they were thinking about how long the people of Britain had struggled for implied rights, and so that's why they made theirs. That's why most people wanted to make a Bill of Rights.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. What about Wendy or Heidi? What strikes you about this quote?
Well, I said at the beginning of the class I never really could understand why people wouldn't want to write the rights down when when this debate was going on with the Federalists. And, you know, history always provides the answer, and if you don't write it down, you struggle, just like Patrick Henry pointed out that history showed. It's got to be explicit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that. You know, we've heard in conference about learning the lessons of the past, right? And here we have Patrick Henry saying, okay, we need to learn the lessons of the past. And I think it's so interesting too that when Britain was doing what it did during the 1760s and 1770s, what did American colonists point to? They said, wait a minute, we have rights as Englishmen in the English Bill of Rights, and you're violating them, right? And so it proved to be so important, not just for these victors of the Glorious Revolution and finally writing down their victory, in terms of these rights, but also, these would be the things that the pamphleteers of the American Revolution would write about. They say, wait a minute, the English Bill of Rights says this. It's not happening for us. Why? The English Bill of Rights says that. You're violating it. How can that be so? And so this document would prove to be incredibly important. It's interesting because here there's a quote from an anti-federalist. He called himself the Federal Farmer. He basically said that until there was a Bill of Rights, quote, we are totally insecure in all of them, meaning all of our rights, and no man can promise himself with any degree of certainty that his posterity will enjoy the inestimable blessings of liberty of conscience, of freedom of speech and of writing and publishing their thoughts on public matters, of trial by jury, of holding themselves, their houses, and papers free from seizure and search upon general suspicion or general warrants, or in short, that they will be secured in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property without depending on the will and pleasure of their rulers. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this last sentence is it's implying exactly what the quote before was saying, that unless you have it explicit, then it's only implied, and anyone can change the idea of what imply means, really. Mm-hmm. Well, what I really meant was, and you even get that sometimes when it's written down, but you have less of a chance when it's written down to have someone say, well, what I really meant was, and if it's only said and not written, then you really have that going on. That's not what I really meant. This is what I'm really going to do to you, or these are really the rights that you are going to be allowed.
Right. Yeah, thanks so much for that. Any other thoughts?
I think it's interesting that he mentions posterity because, the tyranny always grows over time. And so, you might, even if you don't think it's necessary for your generation, your posterity will certainly need it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, and that to me relates to that quote by Elder Christofferson yesterday. It was something to the effect of the less, and he said, internal governance or government that we have, right, the greater the external government will become, right? And so I think that is so interesting to think that, yeah, if we don't secure these things now for ourselves, then government will grow sort of bigger and bigger and try to, govern us in ways perhaps that we don't want. Because this really strikes at the question, and this goes back to Locke and all of the philosophers we've been talking about, okay, is the purpose of government to tell us what to do, or is the purpose of government to listen to what we tell it to do? That's the age-old question, Does government rule? Or does government listen to the ruled and protect rights? And so here we have this federal farmer, an anti-federalist, bringing up these points again. And so, as we think about all these rights, because, rights are, sensitive topics, they're tender, they're important to us, so close to the heart. Which rights protected by the English Bill of Rights do you feel the most strongly about, and why?
Well, for me, freedom of religion.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Well, because I base my whole life off my religion and my beliefs. So everything I do and everything I think stems from that core belief.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Walter, I think I heard you saying something.
Well, I was going to say that I think speech is pretty important. The freedom of speech, I think just it's important to be able to say what you're thinking and not to just think it. And that can be a really, yeah, because I mean, a lot of these people that we've been studying, they have said what they're thinking, and it's really been beneficial to the people around them, to us, and to their country, and so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You know, that makes me think about that quote that we just keep coming back to here, which is so important to American heritage and its teaching philosophy. It's this fourth principle of America's Christian education, history, and government. It's, you know, James Madison, conscience is the most sacred of all property. It's so true. What about for you, Wendy?
Well, I've heard it said that the right to bear arms is the right that secures all the other rights, and I have to kind of agree with that.
Yeah, no,
because if your other rights are infringed, what are you going to fight back with ultimately? You know, when going through the motions of law doesn't work. But I'm curious because it says that the Protestants may have arms. Did they not allow the Catholics to? Because I noticed, you know, 2 pages back it says that anyone who professes the Popist religion or marries a papist shall be excluded.
That's right, yeah. That actually, that brings us to our next point. Thank you so much for that. And once again, thank you also for that insightful comment about the right to bear arms. You know, if we just move over here, you know, it is very important because this is a final thought that, you know, as wonderful a document and as important to our history and to God's hand, you know, moving these rights throughout the earth so that they could come across to America and provide a place where the restoration could take place in the freedoms in which it took place. You know, as much as those things are so laudatory, we need to think that, okay, this document also was so tough on Catholics because Catholics were denied the right to vote, denied the right to sit in Parliament, denied the right to become a king, denied the right to marry a king, and denied commissions in the army and the ability to hold those arms and protect themselves, right? So it is so important that we realize that, okay, this was good, but this isn't the zenith. This isn't the highest point. And so that as wonderful as this was for Protestants, because remember, you know, James II was persecuting Protestants, and so as much as the Protestants cheered, I think we need to, you know, sort of ask ourselves, you know, how do we feel about the English Bill of Rights effect on Catholics? What do we say about that?
Well, I think we already talked about the Articles of Faith that says that we allow all men the same privilege to believe according to their own conscience too. So I think you have to be really careful when you start pointing fingers and not make sure that you don't take so many rights that you end up taking other people's rights.
Yeah.
And that you're counteracting it too much to the extreme.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You know, unfortunately, I've just noticed the clock, and I have my next period class. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. But you know, is there anything that anyone would like to say in closing?
Well, I'd have to say I'm grateful for the Catholics because I don't think Britain would have got this far with the concepts of freedom and liberty if there hadn't have been the struggle between Protestants and Catholics in the first place. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I like thinking about that, and you know, and you know, I am grateful that that at this time, you know, in our country, right, we do live in a country where the restoration of the gospel was able to take place. And sure, as we know, Mormons have been persecuted, but yet the church was still able to come forth, and it is rolling forth now through the earth, right, as a stone cut out of the mountain without hands. and it is filling the whole earth. And so I am grateful for that. As we know, though, as President Monson said, floods will come. He quoted that scripture from Ether, right? There shall be floods. But at the same time, right, we will survive, as he said. And I think it's so important to realize that, there are these rights that, if protected, right, can ensure that survival and that ability for us to freely worship and have that conscience, which is the most sacred of all property. And I'm grateful for these things. I'm grateful for God's hand in it. And I look forward to our class on Wednesday, where we'll talk about Trenchard and Gordon, and I think it'll really be a treat. So enjoy reading them, and then I'll see you on Wednesday.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye.